A private pilot blocked a black man from boarding his own jet, calling security without a second thought. What happened next cost him his entire career. The wind coming off the tarmac at Van Nuys Airport was dry and warm, kicking up little bursts of dust against the tires of the black BMW that rolled up to Hangar 6. It was just past 8:30 a.m. Jalen had arrived exactly on schedule, as he always did. He stepped out of the car without rushing, calm, collected. A navy suede jacket draped over a crisp black tee, clean sneakers, sunglasses tucked into the front of his shirt. He looked like the kind of man who had somewhere to be, but wasn't in a hurry to prove it. From the corner, a young ramp agent gave him a quick nod of acknowledgement before heading toward the rear of the hangar. The Gulfstream G2280 sat on the tarmac, its stairs down and engines being prepped. The aircraft glinted faintly in the morning sun. Jalen walked toward it with the quiet confidence of someone who had flown this route dozens of times before. LA to Kansas City. Meeting with logistics partners. He wasn't in the mood for conversation, but he was thinking through numbers in his head. How to restructure a department, how to get his CTO on board with new hires. But just as he reached the first step, a voice cut through the space behind him. "Excuse me, sir." Jalen paused, turned slightly, and saw a tall man in aviator sunglasses striding toward him. Slim, probably mid-50s, flight uniform sharp and starched. He looked annoyed already. "Can I help you with something?" Jalen asked, not defensive, just curious. The pilot stopped a few feet away, looking him over. "This aircraft is scheduled for a private flight. I'm going to need to see some ID and confirmation. We can't allow unauthorized boarding." Jalen blinked. For a second, he thought it might have been a joke. But the man's expression didn't crack. Not a smile. Not even confusion. Just suspicion. "I own that jet," Jalen replied calmly. "I'm the one flying to Missouri this morning." The pilot's eyes narrowed. "Right. And I'm Elvis." Jalen gave a soft laugh, the kind you give when you're deciding whether to escalate or let something slide. "You can call dispatch. My name's on the manifest." The pilot crossed his arms. "You expect me to believe you own this jet? Look, I don't care who you say you are. You're not going anywhere near this aircraft until someone above me clears it." He pulled a radio from his belt and turned away slightly, speaking low into it, as if trying to confirm Jalen's story. Or maybe disprove it. Jalen didn't move. His hands stayed loose at his sides. No shouting, no posturing. Just patience. He'd been here before. Not this exact situation, but ones like it. Still, something about it burned differently this time. The pilot turned back. "Security will be here in 2 minutes. If you're the owner, I'm sure they'll clear it up." "You're going to feel real stupid in 2 minutes, Jalen said quietly. The pilot smiled. Not the good kind. "I doubt it." Jalen stepped back, pulled out his phone and dialed a contact. 2 rings. "Hey, it's me," he said into the phone. "You might want to get someone on the radio with your Van Nuys pilot. He's blocking me from boarding." "No, he has no idea who I am." There was a short pause. "Yep, I'll wait." As he ended the call, a small black SUV marked security rolled up behind him. 2 men stepped out, looking around, and walked toward the pilot first. "This guy claims he owns the plane," the pilot said. "Refused to show ID. I didn't want to take any chances." One of the guards looked toward Jalen. His brow furrowed for a beat, and then his posture shifted slightly. Recognition. "Wait, you're Mr. Rhodes?" Jalen nodded. "That's right." The guard turned toward the pilot. "Sir, you might want to get on the line with dispatch right now." But what came next would shift everything and expose a mistake the pilot couldn't take back. The pilot's face stiffened. He glanced at the guard, then back at Jalen like he was trying to do the math in his head, and couldn't believe the answer he was getting. "Wait, you're who?" the pilot asked, still holding the radio halfway to his mouth. "Rhodes," Jalen replied calmly. "Jalen Rhodes." There was a pause, and then the pilot gave a soft, skeptical scoff. "Right, and what, you're some kind of investor?" The way he said investor wasn't neutral. It had weight, like he was trying to place Jalen in a box that made the situation make more sense to him. As if investor was the closest acceptable reason someone like Jaylen could be standing there at the steps of a $20 million jet saying it was his. "No," Jaylen said, locking eyes with him. "I own the company." The words landed flat. The pilot didn't flinch. He just let out a breath like he was growing tired of whatever game he thought was being played. The security guard, meanwhile, had stepped back and was already radioing someone else. His face had changed. The second guard kept his gaze on the pilot now, not Jaylen. "I'm not showing you ID," Jaylen continued, "because I don't have to. The company isn't rented. The plane isn't chartered. I own it." The pilot shook his head slowly, but it was clear his certainty was starting to break. "Look, I've been in this business a long time," the pilot muttered, "and I don't take chances when someone shows up without being verified. You say you own the company? Fine. But the way you rolled up, the way you're dressed, it just didn't track." And there it was. The outfit, the attitude, the quiet, not loud enough, not flashy enough, not old enough, not white enough. Jaylen stayed silent for a second, just watching the pilot flounder to make his stance seem more procedural than personal. "You ever think maybe you can't recognize power when it doesn't look like what you're used to?" Jaylen asked. The pilot didn't respond. Then Jaylen's phone buzzed in his hand. He stepped away slightly and answered it. "Hey," he said. "Yeah, he's still standing here. I'll wait." He didn't even need to say who he was talking to. The timing said enough. One of the guards cleared his throat and motioned toward the pilot. "You might want to speak with dispatch, sir, now." Still trying to preserve whatever dignity he could, the pilot turned and raised his radio again. "Base, this is Captain Turner at Hangar 6. I've got a man here claiming he's the owner of Rhodes Air. Name's Jaylen Rhodes. Says the aircraft is his." There was silence for a moment on the other end. Then a voice replied, but too low for Jaylen or the guards to hear. Captain Turner stiffened. "Yes, sir, I understand." He turned, eyes flicking to Jaylen again. But this time there was something else in his stare. Something more nervous. He lowered the radio, lips pressed thin. "Well," he said, clearing his throat. "There must have been a miscommunication." Jaylen didn't smile. He didn't speak. Captain Turner tried again. "I wasn't informed the owner would be on board today. I didn't think I needed to give anyone a heads up to board my own jet," Jaylen said. His tone didn't change. Still even. Still razor sharp. The two guards didn't move. Everyone seemed to be waiting for Turner to say something smart, something graceful. But he didn't have it in him. "I was doing my job," he said, more to the guards than to Jaylen, trying to follow protocol. Jaylen turned to the SUV. "You all good?" he asked the guard closest to him. The man nodded. "All good, sir." And just then, another voice came through the pilot's radio. It was louder this time, and Jaylen caught the end of it. "Stand by. You'll be relieved of duty immediately. Do not proceed with this flight." Turner's eyes widened just slightly. He took a step back from the group, staring down at the device in his hand like he was hoping it had glitched. Jaylen turned to him. "Now you know. But the truth behind that quiet ownership, and why Jaylen bought the whole company in the first place, had its roots in something much deeper." Captain Turner stood frozen, still gripping the radio like he didn't know whether to throw it or beg it to say something different. But it had said what it said. Relieved of duty immediately. He glanced back at the jet. His jet, or so he had believed just 10 minutes ago. The same jet he'd flown to Scottsdale, to Phoenix, to Miami. The one he bragged about over drinks at the officers' lounge in Burbank. And now, apparently, the man he'd tried to push off the steps owned it. Owned the company. Owned him. The radio buzzed again. This time a new voice came through. Lower, calmer. Female. "Captain Turner, please report to Terminal Office 2. Do not initiate takeoff. Do not interact with the client further." He didn't even respond. Just dropped his hand to his side and stared at the tarmac. Jaylen gave a short breath through his nose. Not a sigh, not relief. Just the kind of breath you take when something you've seen coming still hits differently when it finally happens. He turned to the guards. "Thanks. I think we're good here." One of them gave a slight nod and walked toward the security vehicle. The other stayed behind for a second, watching Turner slowly make his way back toward the terminal building, his steps dragging. Jalen didn't gloat. He didn't smirk. Instead, he looked down at his watch and back at the jet. The co-pilot, a younger man with a puzzled face, had stepped halfway down the stairs during the commotion. He hadn't said a word so far. But now, he gave Jalen a nod of acknowledgement, stepping aside to clear the path. "Sorry about that, Mr. Rhodes," he said softly. Jalen didn't respond right away. "Then, you flying this today?" "If you want me to, sir. I'm cleared." Jalen studied him for a second, then gave a single nod and walked up the stairs without another word. Inside, the jet cabin was cool and sleek. Cream leather seats, walnut trim, quiet elegance. No overstatement, just taste. He dropped his bag on the seat closest to the front and sat down, rolling up one sleeve as he leaned forward to unlock his tablet. The aircraft door closed behind him with a firm thud. As the crew began pre-flight, Jalen sat back, staring out the window. He wasn't thinking about Turner anymore. Not directly, anyway. He was thinking about why he had bought the company in the first place. It hadn't been ego. It hadn't even been convenience. 2 months ago, he had been on a different private flight, this time as a client, when something similar had happened. Not as dramatic. No security. Just a lingering tone in the pilot's voice, the kind that made it clear he didn't think Jalen belonged there. They got to Boston late, and Jalen never complained. But when he got home, he poured a glass of scotch and stared at the wall for a long time. And then he picked up the phone. He called his lawyer, a quiet force of nature out in Walnut Creek, and said, "Find out who owns that air charter company. Discreetly. I want it." Within a month, he owned a controlling stake through a holding firm. Changed the leadership, shifted the operations, never once walked into the headquarters. He didn't need them to know his face. He just needed to know they'd think twice before judging someone by the cut of his jeans or the shade of his skin. The jet began to taxi. Jalen looked up from his screen and stared out at the horizon. The sky was clear, wide open, but before the wheels even left the ground, word of what happened that morning had already begun to spread, and things were about to get very public, very fast. The jet lifted off the runway with a low hum beneath the cabin floor. Jalen barely noticed. His mind was already elsewhere, back 2 months ago, the day it all started shifting. It was a Thursday afternoon when he boarded that charter out of Phoenix. He'd just wrapped a contract renegotiation with a supplier out there. He was tired, but it was a good kind of tired, the kind that comes after winning without raising your voice. When he boarded the jet, the pilot didn't say much, barely looked at him, just a clipped, "Welcome aboard." And that was that. Jalen didn't care at first. He wasn't there to make friends. But during the flight, small things piled up. A delay in service. A tone of forced politeness. And when they landed, the pilot spoke to his assistant like she was the client, ignoring Jalen completely. It wasn't aggressive, just cold. Jalen didn't say anything. Not then. But he remembered. 3 days later, sitting on his back patio in Oakland, a glass of Lagavulin in hand, he made the decision. Not a loud one. A quiet one. The kind that moves mountains without fanfare. He called his lawyer, Maxine Nguyen, and said, "I want to own something that makes people rethink how they see success." Maxine didn't flinch. She knew him. She'd helped him buy 2 logistics companies, an entire fiber optic network in Nevada, and a boutique hotel group in Santa Barbara, all without his name ever being on the initial filings. "What am I buying this time?" she asked. "An air charter service." She exhaled. "You want to build one?" "No," Jalen said. "I want the one I flew with last week." Copy that. 6 weeks later, he had it. Rhodes Aviation. Not just one jet. 6. Not just pilots. An entire operating team. He didn't show up at the office, didn't demand his name be stamped on the tail. He wasn't looking for attention. But everyone in the boardroom knew who signed their checks now. And it wasn't just about the incident on that Phoenix flight. That was the spark. The real fire had been building for years. In boardrooms where he had to repeat his title 3 times, before someone stopped assuming he was a guest. In pitch meetings where other execs leaned toward his assistant instead of him. In valet lanes where he got asked if he was picking someone up. He never yelled, never made scenes, but he remembered every face. Buying the charter company wasn't revenge. It was a move on the board, a way to send a message without saying a word. And now, sitting in that jet, his jet, watching Captain Turner walk away like the ground had just shifted under him, it all came full circle. Jalen wasn't new money. He wasn't loud money. He was quiet power, the kind that doesn't need a spotlight because it is the room. He picked up his phone again and texted Maxine. "Jet crew situation handled. Let the ops team know we'll need a new captain. I want someone who looks at people, not resumes." She responded almost instantly. "Got it. I'll handle it." Jalen set the phone down. The co-pilot stepped into the cabin briefly, asking if he needed anything. Jalen shook his head. "Thanks. I'm good." The man gave a short nod, then disappeared back into the cockpit. Outside the window, the ground below was a patchwork of gold and green. Central California, somewhere near Modesto. It looked peaceful. But in his head, Jalen was already thinking 3 moves ahead. This wasn't going to stay private, because someone on the tarmac had been filming, quietly, from behind a fuel truck, and by the time Jalen landed in Kansas City, the clip had already gone viral. By the time the wheels touched down in Kansas City, Jalen had 15 missed calls. 3 from his assistant, 1 from Maxine. The rest from numbers he didn't recognize. Likely reporters, maybe a few opportunists. The kind of people who suddenly remember your name when the internet puts you in their timeline. He didn't answer any of them, but the texts kept pouring in. "Bro, you trending? This you on that jet clip? Tell me you cooked that pilot. Man, the comments. You need to see them." He wasn't surprised. Someone was always filming. That's the world now. A moment isn't just something that happens. It's something that's recorded, edited, posted, and dissected in real time. And there it was. A shaky 48-second clip showing Jalen standing calmly at the base of the jet stairs while Captain Turner barked at him. The audio wasn't perfect, but you could make out enough. "Don't care who you say you are. You can't be the owner. Security is on the way." Then the security guard stepping in, the co-pilot looking uncomfortable, and Jalen's voice calm and measured. "You ever think maybe you can't recognize power when it doesn't look like what you're used to?" That line hit the internet like fire on dry grass. It wasn't long before the hashtags started. Jalen Rhodes, Natwart private jet owner, fired fast. "This is why we buy" comment sections were a mess of applause, debate, and frustration. Some praised him for staying calm. Others shared similar stories of being underestimated. A few pushed back, questioning whether Turner had just been doing his job. Jalen didn't engage. He'd never needed the approval of strangers. Instead, he sat in the back of a black SUV rolling toward his downtown hotel and looked out to the window. Not at the city, at the reflections. You spend your whole life grinding, building, staying low until your moves speak for you. And even when they do, someone will still try to measure your worth by the way you walk, talk, or dress. He wasn't angry. He was tired. Not the kind of tired that sleep fixes. The kind that settles in your bones after the 1,000th time someone thinks you're the assistant. Back at the hotel, he passed through the lobby without lingering. A few guests looked up from their phones. One woman mouthed, "That's him," as he passed. He didn't slow down, just went straight to the elevator, up to the penthouse, and sat down at the long table overlooking the city. He poured a glass of water and finally opened Maxine's message thread. She'd sent a link. He clicked. A morning news segment. Split screen. On one side, the clip of the confrontation. On the other, a host saying, "We've just learned that Mr. Jalen Rhodes is not only the owner of the jet, but the entire charter company. That pilot has reportedly been relieved of duty." They called it an eye-opening incident. One that raises questions about perception, wealth, and implicit bias. Jalen watched for a moment, then muted the video. He didn't need an anchor to tell him what he already knew. People only believe what they're used to seeing. And if you don't fit the picture in their head, they'll question the reality in front of them. He stood, phone in hand, and walked out to the balcony. From this high up, the city looked small. The people, invisible. He wasn't looking down on anyone. But he was above the noise. But what came next wasn't about noise. It was about clarity, and a decision Jalen couldn't put off any longer. Jalen didn't sleep much that night. He wasn't bothered by the headlines. They came and went. He wasn't worried about the company's image either. If anything, Rhodes Aviation just got more free publicity in 12 hours than most startups see in a year. No, what kept him awake was the decision he hadn't made yet. Whether to make it loud or make it final. He sat alone at the small table in the corner of the suite, sipping black coffee as dawn crept over Kansas City's skyline. His laptop glowed in front of him. A report from HR, a draft of a formal apology from Captain Turner, a polite request to reconsider. Turner had sent it late, probably thinking it would soften the blow. It didn't. The message wasn't apologetic. It was self-preserving. I wasn't informed. I've flown high-level clients for years. This could have been handled differently. Jalen read it twice. Never once did the man ask how it felt to be told you didn't belong. Never once did he acknowledge what the real issue was. Not the procedure, not the paperwork, the assumption. And that was the part Jalen couldn't ignore. He picked up his phone and called Maxine. She answered on the first ring. Let me guess. You've made your decision. Yeah, Jalen said. He's done. Want me to put it through quietly? No. Jalen leaned back in his chair. Not this time. There was a pause on the other end. You sure? Yeah. If this were anyone else, he'd already be gone. I'm not about to teach people that your apology matters more than your assumptions. Maxine didn't argue. She understood. All right. I'll handle it. Jalen ended the call and stood up, stretching the stiffness from his shoulders. He wasn't angry. He wasn't vengeful. But letting Turner stay would mean that what happened didn't matter. That being dismissed on your own property could be shrugged off with the right excuse. And that wasn't going to fly. Not in his company. He sent one more message to the operations lead. Effective today, Captain Turner is permanently removed from duty. Offer him a severance package if HR insists. But we're not keeping him in any capacity. No exclamation mark. No added emotion. Just business. He closed the laptop and walked over to the window again. The city was wide awake now. Cars below, people on sidewalks, morning shows buzzing, everyone talking. But Jalen had done what needed to be done. Not to make a point, but to protect a standard. In his world, it wasn't enough to build the table. You had to decide who deserved a seat at it. Turner had shown he didn't. Not because of one mistake, but because when the mistake was pointed out, he still didn't get it. Jalen's assistant knocked lightly and let herself in. She carried a folder, a tablet, and a paper coffee cup. Everything good? She asked, placing the items on the table. Yeah, Jalen said. Handled. She gave him a knowing look, then sat down to go over his schedule. But before she began, she glanced up and said, That video, it really hit people. I've never had so many friends text me about my boss, Jalen smirked. You tell them I'm just a guy who likes jets? She laughed. I told them you're the reason I started dressing better. They both chuckled. Then it was back to work. But what stuck with Jalen long after that morning wasn't the decision itself. It was what it revealed about who gets questioned and who gets trusted, without saying a word. 3 days later, Jalen was back in Oakland. The headlines had shifted. A new scandal, a different name, a fresh round of outrage somewhere else. That's how these things go. But the video kept circulating, quietly, persistently. A few million views turned into 15. Clips from the confrontation were stitched into podcasts, think pieces, even reaction videos. Some people praised his calm, others picked it apart like they always do, debating tone, clothing, delivery. Jalen didn't respond to any of it. He never did. But something strange happened after that. The emails started coming in. Not the usual kind. Not pitches or partnership proposals. These were personal. One was from a young man in Minneapolis who worked as a baggage handler. He said he saw himself in Jalen, how people at the airport always assumed he didn't know much. He wrote that seeing someone like Jalen stand his ground without yelling made him feel seen. Another came from a woman in Arizona. She ran a small charter service and wrote that her own pilots had made similar assumptions before. She thanked Jalen for showing the industry what accountability could look like. There were dozens more like that. No hashtags, no performances, just real people who understood exactly what had happened. Because it had happened to them, too. That's what stayed with Jalen. Not the video, not the trending tags. The quiet truth underneath it all. People are tired of being doubted in rooms they built. And for Jalen, this wasn't the first room. It wouldn't be the last. But this one mattered because it reminded him of something he'd forgotten. That being underestimated is exhausting. But sometimes it's the sharpest tool in your box, because while they're busy sizing you up, you're already buying the building. Late that evening, he walked through the empty hangar of Rhodes Aviation's new facility outside of Oakland. It was quiet, the kind of quiet that lets you hear your own breath. One of the maintenance crews was working on a tail light. A cleaner waved from across the floor. Jalen walked toward the nearest jet, the one that sparked it all. He didn't touch it, just looked at it for a long time. Then he turned around and walked out. As he reached the exit, he paused by a bulletin board near the employee lounge. It had birthday notices, maintenance schedules, and a new flyer with the company's updated mission statement. He hadn't written it, but someone had pulled the words from something he said years ago. Respect doesn't come from how loud you speak. It comes from how you carry the silence. Jalen smiled. Not big. Just enough. Outside, the sky was darker now, the air cooler. He unlocked his car, slid into the seat, and drove away without saying a word. Because the message had already been sent. Sometimes it's not about proving who you are. It's about standing firm when someone decides you're not enough, and letting the truth do the talking. If this story moved you, think about the moments where someone tried to measure your worth without knowing your weight. Then do what Jalen did. Hold your ground, build your legacy quietly, and let their assumptions cost them instead. Subscribe for more real stories that hit different.